Good afternoon, everybody. This is Randy Welsh with the National Wilderness Stewardship Alliance. I'm the Executive Director and will be your host today, along with Dave Cantrell, our NWSA Programs Chair. Take away, Dave.
Hey, delighted to be here, and it's so great to finally hear about this wonderfully important research that you guys have been at so hard for the last year.
All right. So these NWSA webinar series are intended to provide useful information for the wilderness stewardship groups around the country that will help them be more effective and efficient in their volunteer organizations, in their wilderness stewardship work, and in all sorts of activities that they might pursue. Today, we're very pleased to have Rebecca Nemec, PhD, Assistant Professor at Colorado State University, assisted by her assistant, Martha Barut, who is also a PhD student in the degree program at Colorado State University. They've been doing some research using NWSA and the Poudre Wilderness Volunteers as guinea pigs to better understand what it takes to keep wilderness stewardship volunteers coming back. So we're really looking forward to hearing from Rebecca and Martha today about the research, about their findings, as we all, I think, need to better understand what it takes for people to really want to participate and be volunteers in wilderness stewardship work. So with that, Rebecca, Martha, we're going to turn it over to you. And I just want to let everybody know that we will be taking questions at the end of the presentation. You can look on your screen. There is a place for you to ask those questions. Just type them in, and then Dave and I will queue them up at the end of the presentation, and we'll have Rebecca and Martha respond to those questions in an orderly fashion. If for some reason you have technical problems through the course of the presentation, you can use the chat function to let Dave or I know, and we'll try to help you out as best we can. So with that, Rebecca and Martha, why don't you go ahead and take it away.
Great. Thank you, Randy and Dave. My name is Rebecca Nemec. I'm an assistant professor in the Human Dimensions of Natural Resources Department at Colorado State University. And through my research, I look at community engagement, community outreach for conservation, and what influences communities' engagement in stewardship activities. And so I feel really lucky to be able to partner with PWV and NWSA through this research. It's been a really, really incredible opportunity, and we've learned a lot from that partnership. So thank you for hosting us today. And I wanted to introduce Martha Barut, who is a master's candidate in the Conservation Leadership program here at Colorado State University, and she's really been spearheading this study. And so she did all of the interviews that we'll be talking about today, and she'll be talking about a lot of the results and conclusions from her study. So she really is the brains behind all of this research. Would you like to introduce yourself any further?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Martha, and I've had the great pleasure of being Becky's research assistant for a little over a year now. And yeah, we worked together to design this study, and I have the great privilege of doing in-person interviews with many past and present Poudre Wilderness volunteers. And it's been a lot of fun, and we're excited to be able to share some results with all of you.
Awesome. And we are working on we have put together a report. And so feel free with all of these findings that we're going to share with you today. So feel free to contact us to get a copy of that report. And also we are currently working on an academic publication that builds on these findings as well. Okay, great. So today we're going to be talking about some of our research focused on volunteer retention and wilderness stewardship organizations. And let's see. I can't move forward currently. Oh, there we go. Okay. So the research that we are going to talk to you about today was basically motivated by the following question of how do we increase volunteer retention in wilderness stewardship organizations? And we really focused on this question for our research because many nonprofits organizations and agencies really struggle with volunteer retention, and low retention rates can lead to wasted funding and resources spent on retraining new volunteers. And in addition, high retention rates are really important for maintaining long-term projects and monitoring and building a really supportive and connected volunteer community. So today we're going to start off by basically reviewing some of the existing literature and research on this question and on the subject of volunteer retention. After that, I'm going to give an overview of our study objectives, what we were trying to achieve through our study. Then Martha is going to talk about our methods and results for this particular study. And then together we're going to go over some suggestions for volunteer organizations for increasing volunteer retention, both from our own research as well as from the Central Rockies Wilderness Volunteer Workshop, where we presented these results back in April. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So in order to develop strategies to increase retention, we really first need to understand why people continue volunteering over time or why they stop volunteering. And so what do previous studies say? Well, Ryan et al. Is one study that examined this question. It was from 2001, and they did a survey of around 148 volunteers in ecological stewardship programs in Michigan to try to understand what influenced how long volunteers stayed with the organization. And what they found was really that social interactions and project organization really predicted volunteer commitment. And while people were really inspired to first start volunteering to help the environment, this was not a significant predictor of how committed they were to volunteering over time. And so something to note here is that in this study, the Ryan et al. Study, project organization basically referred to the extent to which volunteers felt projects were well organized, the extent to which they really felt needed, and knew what was expected of them and felt they were working with a good leader. And social interaction was really measured as the extent to which volunteers met new people, saw familiar faces, and had fun. Another study in Seattle also basically tracked retention of, these were urban environmental stewardship volunteers. And so this was a study by Asa and Blana in 2012. And they found really similar results. So they found that volunteers' tendency to keep volunteering was really motivated by more personal and kind of social benefits rather than environment-related reasons. And so these environmental motivations were only really salient predictors of participation when those personal and social motivations were met. And in this study, the authors really measured social benefits as the extent to which volunteers were motivated to be with like-minded people, talk with others, and enjoy the experience. And personal benefits were really measured as the extent to which volunteers were motivated to make a difference and feel less guilty about environmental problems. Okay, so this really brings us, so clearly the previous literature really suggests that social and personal motivations are important, but this really led us to our next question, which is how can wilderness stewardship volunteer organizations really fulfill these personal and social needs or these personal and social motivations? So we know if these personal and social motivations are fulfilled, they're more likely to keep volunteering, but what specific practices make people feel valued, feel a sense of belongingness and social connections with others in their experience with wilderness stewardship organizations? So this is really what motivated our work. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand things off to Martha, who will really describe the methods and results of our particular study. And I wanted to mention one more time that Martha really did the heavy lifting on this study. So she did all the interviewing and coding that she's going to be telling you about today.
Mm-hmm. All right, so the methods that we developed for this study was a kind of two-pronged approach. One approach was through online surveying of NWSA members and decision makers, and then also interviews and surveys of Cooter Wilderness volunteers as our case study organization that kind of exemplifies great social interaction and great volunteer recruitment and retention over time. So what we ended up compiling were 40 surveys from PWV members, past and present, and I conducted 33 interviews with PWB members, past and present, and we ended up, in order to get a diverse viewpoints, we made sure to separate interviews so that we got groups of the highly active volunteer categories. So that's people who are really involved in leadership and committee chairs. And then we have the semi-active members who reach the 6 patrols per year minimum, but aren't really involved in leadership. And then we have inactive members who were previously active volunteers, but have since left the organization for one reason or another. So all these interviews were conducted in person or on the phone. And then for the second aspect of looking at NWSA, we did an online survey, and the spread of the respondents were that we ended up getting 25 involved in organization decision-making, 12 that were just volunteers, not involved in decision-making at all, and 1 agency partner. And something to note about the surveys of the PWB volunteers, we got 40 additional surveys to supplement the interviews, because when we went to contact PWB members of willingness to be interviewed about the organization, we had an overwhelmingly positive response of people, active and inactive, who were highly willing to talk about PWB, which I think really speaks to the organization as well, that it was really great that we got such an overwhelming response that we had to supplement the interviews with online surveys, because I was just one person and was not capable of doing 73 interviews in a 2-month period while also being a full-time student. Anyway, so I just have a few example interview questions that were included in every in-person interview and PWB survey. So I was really getting people to tell me stories, like tell me about a time in which you felt like you truly belonged to the volunteer community or for PWB. When did you feel like you really truly belonged to PWB? What do they do as an organization that really makes you feel belonged? What do they do as an organization that really makes you feel valued? And then I asked to share anecdotal experiences of incidents that might have made someone feel overwhelmed or frustrated or less motivated to really contribute overall to the organization. And of course, if I was talking to someone who had left, I asked, why did you leave? And I also asked of suggestions for improvement. Is there anything that the organization could do to make you feel more motivated to contribute? And as I said, yeah, if they had left, I asked them, why did you leave? So I'm going to go more in depth into these key findings, but these are the key themes that we coded, as it's called in our qualitative research, that we took quotes based on keywords, based on respondents to key questions, and themed them, and then separated them into common themed tools. So a key aspect we were looking at was valuation. And for Poudre Wilderness volunteers, the number one overwhelming response was receiving thanks from the public. So each of these subsequent valuation themes, seeing impacts of works and goals, getting thanked by the organization formally or informally, and being asked to contribute a particular skill or joining leadership they're in order of the frequency of the responses. The same with belongingness. Overwhelmingly, the number one response for what made you feel like you truly belonged was the spring training. PWB really seems to nail the weekend-long spring training camping trip that is there to train new volunteers. They get split into animal groups, which also came up as a very common theme that really fostered belongingness. And and that you really meet like-minded people in a formal and informal setting that really helps with the belongingness aspect. So other key aspects of belongingness were serving a leadership role or contributing a particular skill, and that goes along with the same theme of valuation. And then social events generally, such as the annual event at Odell's here in Fort Collins, where people met up over beers and really bonded with each other. And then another key thing is just being with similar like-minded individuals and really connecting over shared interests or mutual appreciation for each other. And then the final one is mentorship, mentor-mentee relationships, that people who really hit it off on those mentor patrols really seem to be a predictor of belongingness and people's motivation to stay involved. And then I asked some negative questions of what made you feel overwhelmed, what made you feel frustrated, and that kind of fit into challenges, which were around too much work and requirements, too many trainings, too many reports, making like a lacking connection with others, like as we saw from the literature that advised our study design, socialization and building those connections are key. So, of course, when I asked about challenges, one that came up were those individuals who did not feel like they made a meaningful connection with another member. Then you have accessibility issues. Some people said I left or I got frustrated because it's really difficult just to get out onto the trail. You know, people age out of the organization as their ability changes with time. And then other frustrations were perception of not feeling appreciated by the organization for work or contributions, or an exclusive atmosphere, particularly around the leadership, where there's a perception that the leadership was kind of an in-group and that other volunteers it found difficulty accessing them. So, and that also goes in with why you left. But we're really going to focus more on the positives and recommendations off of those that can hopefully inform the organizations that partner with NWSA. So I'm going to move on. Yeah. So the overwhelmingly number one response for what makes volunteers feel valued was thank you from the public, or for PWV, it was most often trail users, people they were passing while they were doing environmental stewardship activities that really made them feel great about it. So you have, quote, every encounter with trail users that showed gratitude for our work while cutting down trees as a response to what makes you feel valued in PWV. And you also have people on the trail who are enjoying it say thank you for volunteering and for the work that you do. That's right at the top, which is interesting because organizational support is perceived as being paramount importance, but really with these volunteering opportunities with environmental stewardship, it seems like people really get the most out of just thanks from the public, feeling like they're making an impact, which I'll touch upon now. The second most prominent factor was that that valuation was influenced by seeing the impact of a day's work. So 15 respondents cited this as being really important. So, and these are some example quotes from the interviews and surveys. Revisiting the weed infestation site, seeing a very noticeable reduction in the density of weeds present. That's what really makes the difference for some people. Seeing the finished trail descriptions after they've worked on that, or walking out from a hike and then coming back and feeling really good about the work you did, how you cleared the trail or how you pulled weeds, really making a big impact. And then slightly less prominent than the public recognition and the seeing just impacts of a day's work was the official recognition from the organization. So official recognition from our hard work was in the form of the Gold Thistle or Silver Pick Awards that PWV does at their end of year event. And then getting your 5-year pin recognition is a great motivator. And then also getting praise, something as simple as saying thank you so much for what you've done, for coming out here, for making the effort, make a difference for people. Mm-hmm. And then our study revealed the huge importance in orientation trainings, such as PWV's annual spring training event. And this camping weekend proved to be the single key event that made volunteers feel a sense of belongingness, with 23 mentions, which is a lot, which is over half of my interviews and surveys mentioned spring training as a key event that really fostered a sense of belongingness in the organization. So should also be noted that 10 respondents cited animal groups specifically as an important thing. So animal groups, if you're not aware of PWV as an organization, they each get a themed animal, as far as I understand, and the animal group leader is kind of the mentor of a group of new volunteers at the spring training weekend. And you're with that group doing different orientation activities, different trainings, different simulations, and it's really a great way to get to know each other. And if you're, say, in the deer group, animal group, you meet people who are veteran PWV members who were also in the deer group when they were trained, and it's a really great way of building camaraderie. So aside from the animal group, just generally spring training offered bonding with several individuals, again, bonding was mentioned as a key word that fosters belongingness, and then, yeah, all three of them mentioned bonding. All right. So another key aspect that fostered a sense of belongingness was being asked to contribute in a way that uses specific skills or interests or puts them in a leadership or mentorship role. So PWV, I believe, does really well of assessing people's interests, of how involved they want to get into the organization, and then if someone says, yeah, I'd be interested in the weed crew because I'm interested in noxious or invasive weeds, they ask them, well, let's get you on the committee, let's get you involved. And getting those leadership roles really makes people feel like, yeah, people value my time, people value what I'm interested in, and it's really a great way of fostering that belongingness. So another way was leadership, such as the board chair or the executive board. So a great way of getting to know people. And then also just being a mentor on mentor hikes was another component. And here are a bunch of example quotes from respondents saying similar things along these lines, that being asked to be a leader, a mentor, or contribute on trail patrolling really helps. And then when asking about frustrations or suggestions going forward, a key theme that we came up with was inclusivity and listening to volunteers. So when feedback is offered, you have to make sure that you say, I hear where you're coming from, I appreciate your feedback, we're going to take it into consideration so that people feel like their voices are being heard. So, and then another thing is leadership succession. So if the organization maybe has an in-group or it feels cliquey, that kind of directly or indirectly, intentionally or unintentionally might edge people out who might be more fringe in the organization. And same with contributing skills. People want to bring their skills, bring their expertise, definitely being open to that and fostering that kind of openness of people, being open to suggestions, being open to contributing different or new skills would be really beneficial. And another thing that kept coming up relating to the animal groups as well is that mentor-mentee relationships are really key. And people note the good and the bad about mentorship. So, and it's all around the social aspects and connecting with someone socially. So we really think that fostering a long-term relationship of mentors and mentees, checking in, saying, how's it going? You getting your hikes in, want to go out together on a hike, or even socially, like all those things, especially with people you hit it off with, those follow-ups are really appreciated. Yeah. And then similarly, but this also applies to emails and phone calls, consistent communication and responses from the organization. So something like responding to an email in a timely fashion, or responding to a voicemail, or calling someone who maybe hasn't reached their amount of participation that they reached in previous years, and asking them what's going on kind of just makes people feel like, oh, Like, you remember me, I'm a valued member, you care about what's going on, and you want to help me contribute to the best of my ability and as much as I would like to. So yeah, those kind of communications from organization leadership and communication members is really important. Yeah. And then another theme that came up from our study was perceived frustration or overwhelming perception of the rules and requirements of an organization. So I think it really boils down to people are volunteers. They're not being paid for their time. It's all volunteer based. So they want to contribute and not feel like and get work done, but not feel like they're at a job or they're working. So I think that a key way of assuaging that opinion would be to minimize requirements so that there's less pressure, and to make it fun, like make it about having fun, which I know PWB is very good at encouraging that as a key component. All right. And now I'm throwing it back to Becky, right?
Absolutely. So from all of this, and thank you, Martha, for that wonderful overview. So we compiled kind of 5 strategies. I'm sorry, it's very strange. Somehow in the formatting, changing from Google Slides to PowerPoint, the format got messed up here, so my apologies. But we came up with 5 strategies, potentially, for enhancing retention based on these findings. The first is providing opportunities for official public recognition and as well as unofficial thank yous, and also thinking about providing that public recognition at sort of different points, and so not forcing everyone to go and do hundreds and hundreds of hours before they get any sort of public recognition. Even just little pieces of recognition can be really motivating, and that actually links to a lot of psychology research, which has looked at sort of the role of proximal goals in enhancing motivation for larger tasks. And so a famous psychologist, Bandura, did some research around education and found that when people set sort of smaller goals and then get rewarded for achieving those smaller goals on the way to a larger goal, then they're more likely to be motivated, have a greater sense of efficacy. And that's really kind of what Martha found here. Mm-hmm. And so as much as you can provide that recognition for those smaller goals on the way, that can be really motivating to folks. Mm-hmm. The second piece was really providing opportunities to demonstrate the impact of volunteers' work, and so this can be done really creatively, but this actually links back to that Asa and Blana study that I talked about at the beginning of this, of like feeling that personal motivation of feeling like you're important, you're needed, and you're making an impact. We found that as well was really important for motivating volunteers. And so as much as there's a way to kind of creatively demonstrate the impacts of volunteers' work, whether that's mapping how much work has been done, sharing how many hours that have been contributed, all sorts of different ways of really showing that impact and making volunteers feel like their specific skills are needed can be really impactful. And that sort of relates to the next point of asking volunteers personally to contribute to mentoring, as well as specific tasks that really build on their unique skills or interests or put them in leadership positions. And so what I found interesting about this is I thought that being asked to contribute a specific skill or being put in a leadership position would make volunteers feel valued. But I didn't think that this would be as important for a sense of belongingness and fostering that sense of belongingness. But interestingly, it was really important. So not only did it make volunteers feel valued when they were engaging in some sort of leadership or mentorship position, or even when they were asked to contribute a very particular skill, but they felt like they really belonged to an organization. So that's what I thought was really interesting.
And I also think that kind of builds off of previous studies that cite frustrations with role ambiguity or not feeling like they have like a group to be with, is that getting in those mentor positions, leadership positions, or having someone have a specific role or task that based on their personal skills and interests really helps the belongingness factor.
Absolutely. And it reminds me of a quote from I think one of Martha's slides, or one from Martha's analysis, where even something as simple as someone being asked to role play a mountain biker at the spring training in their kind of role play activities, the fact that people knew that that person was a mountain biker and that they had this specific role in the spring training and it seems like such a silly task, but even just that small ask, knowing that they're a mountain biker, asking them to contribute that can really increase volunteer sense of belongingness. And then the next one we have is potentially controversial, and I'll get into this. We brought this up at the workshop in April, and I think there was a lot of discussion. So I'm mainly just bringing this up to foster discussion. It's not always something that can be done, but it's this idea of rules and requirements to accommodate volunteers with varying time and ability. And so I think it's just a tension that we brought up. Obviously, the rules and requirements are there for a really important reason, and can accomplish a lot. And we found that it might be really helpful for some volunteers, but for other volunteers, maybe those who have less time, kind of felt overwhelmed by that. And I'll get into some suggestions for that that folks came up with at the workshop in April in the next couple of slides. And then the final one that Martha already talked about was maintaining that constant personalized communication and mentorship with volunteers. And so as much as that communication can be like having someone in leadership reaching out to maybe someone who's only come once to a volunteer event and say, hey, how are things going? Do you want to come back? How's your first experience? A lot of volunteers talked about how that can be really impactful. So we took some of these preliminary results to the Central Rockies Wilderness Volunteer Workshop, which took place on April 10th, 2019, and we shared some of these results. And then we ran what's called a World Cafe event, which basically we put up these different recommendations and then had people rotate through and provide ideas, or they could disagree with the recommendations or provide ideas for how to enhance retention based on some of our findings. And so what I wanted to do really quickly is share some. These were not all of the recommendations that folks came up with, but at least some of them, because these were really kind of co-developed by people who are experts in wilderness stewardship volunteer programs. And so the first, and I'll just kind of go through the list right now, but happy to brainstorm any of these in more depth in the Q&A after this. So the first suggestion was creating a survey monkey to inventory skills and interests of volunteers, and then kind of using that inventory to then ask volunteers to contribute based on those very specific skills and interests. And so the idea being here, like if we can foster belongingness by just trying to understand, like, what do volunteers bring that's unique and special, and then asking them to contribute that, that can be really impactful. So this is an idea folks came up with. There's also talk about hosting monthly social gatherings and off-season affiliation meetings or talks, hosting a yearly kickoff training or meeting, welcoming new members individually at this meeting, and then also having mentors follow up with less engaged volunteers, basically outline a clear path to further involvement. And so, as Martha mentioned, that mentor-mentee relationship was really important, and as much as that can remain for years, that can be really impactful for retention. And what, interestingly, it's not just impactful for the person being mentored, just being a mentor, like mentoring someone else, enhances feelings of belongingness, which can enhance retention. And then we had maintaining consistent contact with volunteers. People talked about newsletters, emails, social media on the off season as well as the on season, and then making expectations for volunteers clear. And then I have a few more here, which is using a Google Doc to really capture the knowledge and pass this knowledge to future leaders and members to kind of make sure folks know what those expectations are, what's required with them to reduce that role ambiguity, as Martha was talking about. And then there's ideas around mentioning individuals in newsletters to provide recognition. So there's a few different ideas around recognition. I'll jump to the bottom one as well, of having lots of different ways of giving people recognition. And so not all people want to like come in front of a group of people and get like a whole ceremony for them, but maybe they'll appreciate like a dinner for them, or mugs, or I don't know what a SCARD is. I guess a card is what that was supposed to say. Pins, patches, ribbons, sunglasses, like there's a lot of different ways to try to give people recognition and give them give recognition for achieving those smaller goals on the way. Then people talked about pairing up mentors and mentees by skills, interests, or demographics. So thinking about how can we make that mentor-mentee relationship super meaningful by kind of building on shared interests. There was also creating targeted requests to individuals rather than mass emails, and so that seemed to make a huge difference, in particular when Martha talked to folks who left the organization in terms of anyone who's thinking about leaving or who is attending less and less. Just that one personalized communication can really make a difference.
Yeah.
Awesome. And then we had clarifying the purpose of rules and requirements. There's a few conversations around rules and requirements. And I think something that people came to talk about was really that sometimes the rules and requirements are really necessary. And the problem is not that they exist, but that volunteers may not know why they are there and the purpose of them. So they just feel like bureaucratic challenges that remind them of work rather than kind of understanding why do we have this, how does this help achieve our goal, and so really clearly communicating about that as well. And finally relating to that, like providing recognition, really creating tiers of recognition for different types of tasks. And so you can create recognition for, say, number of trees cut, number of hours given. And so there's a lot of different ways to think about basically giving people recognition and honors that may not just be like devoting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours.
Yeah.
And then finally, folks talked a little bit about some broader suggestions that they have, which is one idea was partnering with diverse community organizations and learning from other stewardship organizations. And really communicating between organizations, state, and federal agencies regarding rules. And this can relate back to that regulation piece of like which of these are really essential and which of these might we be able to be flexible with depending on the volunteer. Okay, so that is our presentation for today. We have, as I mentioned before, we have a whole report on these findings from PWV and the NWSA survey, and we will be working, Martha will be working on a wonderful academic publication based on all of this, and we're happy to share the report with you or hear your ideas for future work and how to interpret some of our findings as well. And so feel free to contact us. These are our emails, and we really appreciate you all listening today, and we really appreciate this opportunity to present today. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
The mute button.
Yeah.
Rebecca, Martha, we thank you so much for the presentation and for the great information that will help wilderness stewardship groups be able to retain volunteers in the future. So we are starting to get a couple of different questions. So I just will pause for a moment and let people go ahead and use the question function on the GoToMeeting platform. If you have questions, we'll stick around and respond to those questions as we go through. So our first question today is from Meg. It says, I'm curious about how many annual volunteers PWV has and how many return each year. So Dave, maybe that's a question for you.
Martha, unless you've got better numbers than I do, I'm happy to handle that.
I do have some information on that. So I believe in 2018, PWV had 318 active volunteers, and over the past 6 years, PWV has had a range of between 52 and 73 new recruits each year, with 55 to 80% volunteer retention beyond that first year of involvement. I don't know if you have any additional figures, but yeah.
The one thing to add to that is that the question of when people leave is complicated and interesting. Some people just don't like it, and the first year is all they do. Other people stay with it several years and then find that it's not meeting their needs or that their circumstances have changed. So Meg and others, if you're interested in this, I'd be happy to give you more detailed numbers on that. You could contact me through NWSA. But I'd be happy to give you a detailed breakdown and how we're trying to think about what that means.
Okay. Don asks about distributing a PDF of the slide. I will say that the video recording is being done right this instant, and the program will be on our NWSA website by the end of the week. So if that's sufficient, Rebecca, if you also want to send me the slide program, I can put that on our website if that's okay.
Absolutely.
All right,
Happy
another
to do that.
question. Okay, great. We'll do that. So the question is, how would you recommend starting a mentorship program? That's like a webinar all in itself.
Yeah. How to do mentorship and how to foster that like kind of environment and relationship. Yeah, I think it would definitely. I think training groups would be a solid way of starting that kind of mentorship. And as far as like recruiting mentors, people who are already pretty highly involved, people who are interested or curious about like the inner workings of the organization. Yeah, I don't know. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, and I think creating a database in terms of people's interests and what sort of tasks they're interested in doing, and also maybe kind of what their limitations are or how much time they have to devote to things and how much they're trying to what they're trying to get out of their volunteering experience, and then trying to pair people who've been there for a while with folks who are new based on sort of those common interests and also their time. And I think that can be really useful because then folks who say only have a few days a year to devote to volunteering can be paired with others who have similar time constraints and figure out, okay, how do I fit volunteering into all of the other things I do and get really mentored on those questions, whereas others who are really deeply interested in getting deeply involved in leadership positions can be paired with others who have been involved in those leadership positions. And I think that can really make for an effective mentoring program where people feel like they can learn from their mentors as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. We have another question that really gets to what are some other examples that you might have about fostering social interaction or bonding if the organization isn't yet big enough to have like a spring event training. What were some other examples of ways organizations provided for that bonding?
Yeah, I mean, some things were small, like just going out to eat together or for a drink after a session of volunteering. But then other things were organized events, maybe sponsored by a brewery or a restaurant. But you can really go small scale with it, with just kind of inviting people to like a barbecue. That's just, I know that a lot of PWV members go to there's a highly active member who has an annual Christmas party that just has nothing to do with environmental stewardship, but just really just a nice informal setting for people to get together. Yeah, those kinds of situations really, I think, help foster the social aspect of it.
And I think on just building on something Martha said earlier about spring training is a critical piece of spring training that really made people feel that sense of belongingness was the kind of animal groups, which are actually fairly small groups. And so what's interesting is even if you don't have like 50 people to all train at once, you can still create like small mentorship groups where maybe they're all kind of practicing the same task together, and maybe you give each small group a name. And there has been a bunch of kind of psychology research on the power of creating a shared group identity, particularly among small groups. And that when you feel like your small group has an identity, is different from other groups, it's really special in this way, and you have an animal name associated with that group, then that can really kind of foster that sense of belongingness. So even if you don't have 50 people to train, you can still think about dividing your volunteer organization into those smaller groups and giving them those group identities.
Okay. Dave, with your counseling background, do you want to take the next question?
How do you handle volunteers who cannot work well with other people or who have cognitive/mental handicaps? Lori asks. And divide that in two parts. There are people who have some difficulty working with others. And there are people who have some difficulty talking with visitors on the trail. The question of what your mission is and what you're asking of people obviously plays into this strongly. If someone is cutting trees, they don't need the same level of social skills as someone who is talking to visitors at the trailhead and explaining to them how they can go easier on the resource. But pairing those people up with someone that you've thought about quite carefully, if you see someone who's having trouble in those areas, perhaps you can find someone who's exceptionally good at working with people and with difficult people, the person who you're trying to train, and just pair them up to work together. The question of cognitive mental handicaps, of disabilities, of learning interferences is certainly a very complex one. But because this is a membership that we want to welcome and bring in, but they may have special needs, you may have to find ways to work with them more carefully, depending on what the interference is. And again, I think much of the answer is pairing them with people who have some background, some understanding, who have the patience to work with someone who may need just a little extra time. What you hear in both of those things is pairing people up, getting out on the trail, going at the mission with others who have both expertise and the personal skills that you need.
Yeah, and definitely in agreement with that. When doing my interviews, some people said, I'm only interested in trail restoration. I don't want to talk to the public. And I found that kind of niche, that role, and I'm perfectly happy there. And that's what I like to do, and that's what I'm going to continue to do. And that's perfectly fine. Really, yeah, just making sure that you're accommodating to people's needs and interests and preferences. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we've exhausted the questions we have with the presentation. I just want to again thank Rebecca and Martha for the great, wonderful webinar today, and we appreciate everybody coming and attending. I just want to put a shout out. I saw some of our attendees today are on the registration list for the National Wilderness Workshop coming up in a couple of weeks here in Bend, so we'll look forward to seeing you there. And our next webinar is scheduled in November. It's a continuation, part 2 of our look at the JEDI, Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion seminar. We started with the Avarna group. We're going to be looking at practical strategies that wilderness stewardship organizations can apply to be more inclusive, be more diverse in their organizations. And so we hope that you'll join us for that. Registration information is on our website. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and close off today. Thanks everybody for participating. We hope that you have a wonderful rest of the day. Thanks again, Rebecca and Martha.
Thank you all.
And thank you guys too for having us.